Hey everybody, this week we're going to take a look at that ink that I used in the Sailor Pro Gear Slim review. This is Waterman Serenity Blue. Now, like I was saying in that review, I was kind of surprised to see the dry time to flow rate from this ink. So I figured this week we'd take a look at it. Now, I shouldn't be too surprised by the results that I got with this one, considering that the company has been in the stationery game since 1883. But nevertheless, I was, and still am to an extent. Now, it was my initial feelings about this ink as just another dull blue ink that people use in nib and feed testing that kept this bottle unused in my cabinet for over a year. It's actually funny how that the Pro Gear Slim review actually got me to give this ink a chance, and I'm kind of glad I did. For an entry-level ink, I'm actually starting to trust it more in my pens than a couple of the more expensive inks that I've tried. And at a $10 price point with 50 mil, I could easily see myself picking up another bottle or two without any extra thought. And that's always a good quality to have in a fountain pen ink. So enough with the overview. Let's take a look at the ink. This time around, I have Serenity Blue inked up in my Atelier Lusso Andromeda with a beast of a custom stub nib. It was actually this combination that convinced me to do the review so soon, and I think you'll see why here in a second. This pen has huge flow, and it really shows off some of the more subtle properties of the ink. And on the Tomoe River Paper of the Endless Works notebook, boy, do those properties really show off. So let's go ahead and zoom in, and we'll talk about the ink. Now, right off the top, this is a nice royal blue, as my podcast co-host Urban would call it. But unlike the other royal blues I've used, this one is blue without being blurple. Think kind of like Bay State blue. In fact, this ink actually does have a nice little surprise. The more of the ink you get on the paper, the more of that nice subtle red sheen you start to get. And I may be a minority on this one, but I prefer my inks to have more of a subtle sheen than the punch you in the face sheen that you get from like Walden Pond or other inks of that nature. Aside from that, looking at the dry time here, even with this nib, it's still pretty fast. It was dry at just over 20 seconds, and even at that point, if you look here, at the 20-second mark, it was still almost completely dry. Honestly, I think some of that may have been residue from what was left over on my fingers when I was doing the little test, but that's beside the point. Speaking of points, I mean, coming from this stub, that dry time is on point, and that's amazing. One other thing, look at this shading. This ink starts really rich and keeps that nice dark blue quality all the way through to the full saturation that you see on the third and the fourth pass. And there's almost no difference between 3 and 4. I must say though, this has to be one of the most favorite ink blots that I've ever done on this channel up to this point. The dynamic from light to dark is really nice, and it's really even, and it's really saturated right off the bat, which is so cool. And right there, you can see that sheen I was talking about. It's just coming through so beautifully. Now, let's go ahead though and break out the Rhodia dot pad for our water sample. Now let's go ahead and zoom out just a little bit so we can get a little bit of a better look while we do this. All right, there we go. Back to full zoom out. Now, I'm actually really interested to see how this turns out. This ink doesn't claim any water resistance, so let's see what we'll get. Okay, now this is what I call a result. It has definitely faded, but it's still recoverable. I feel safe calling this about a 2.5 out of 5 for water resistance. It's not waterproof, but it has held up well enough that I feel confident taking this ink out of the house. So I guess let's go ahead and move on to some final thoughts. Okay, so for the final thoughts, we're going to do things a little bit different. The first, as you can tell, I'm not behind the camera. I wanted you guys to get a little bit of a look at what goes on behind the scenes, like this thing above my head, which, yeah, it's always there, and it's always fuzzy, and it's always annoying. But it gets me good audio for the videos, so that's what matters most. The next thing, I'm not going to do a 1 to 10 rating. I think I'm done with those now. It seems a little disingenuous to you guys, and I want you to be able to make up your own minds when it comes to the products. In this case, for Waterman Serenity Blue, it's got a good dry time. It's got a good color to it. It's got good shading, nice subtle sheen, and to me, those are very important things. The con that I have with it is the water resistance could be better, but that's not enough of a con for me to not like that ink, especially at the $10 price point that it's at. So if that seems like an ink for you where you want a good, cheap ink that performs well, pick up a bottle or two. You're not going to be disappointed if you do. And that's really the important thing when it comes to pens and paper. Is it going to suit your needs? Are you going to be happy with your purchase? And with Waterman Serenity Blue, I think you are. So that being said, I'm going to wrap up the review here. Thank you guys for watching. Don't forget to follow the channel on Twitter and Instagram and support the channel on Patreon. Don't forget to join the Discord and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And of course, like the video if you liked it, dislike it if you dislike it. That's entirely up to you. And if you like podcasts, listen to my show 2 Guys, 0 Planners with Urban Hafner. I think you'll like it.